Hey, what's up guys? Welcome back. Today we are jumping right back into this ultimate SG build from Solo Guitars. We're going to do the painting work today, get this thing pretty close to done on the finishing. It's going to take a little bit more after this video, but we'll make some progress. So first off, we're going to tape this guy up and get it ready for the paint. Pretty straightforward process here, but one that you need to pay attention to. Paint, of course, when you're spraying, goes everywhere. So you got to cover everything that you don't want painted. What I'm doing first here is just putting a little strip of paint over the back of each of the holes. So I put one strip over top, and that makes sure that no paint gets into that cavity that I don't want there. Then I run some of my painter's tape over the top of that cavity to cover it, and I'm going to cut around the outside with my razor blade here and make sure that that just sits in there nicely. It's pretty easy. You just put it in at like a 45-degree angle into the corner of the routing, and then you should be able to cut that outline. Use your fingernail or your thumbnail to push the tape into the corner first. No problem. Looks good. Next up, we're going to move back to the front of this thing. We've got to tape up the post holes, cavity, and fretboard. So pretty straightforward process. For the post holes, I just ball up some tape and jam it in there. You can probably also use earplugs for this. That's something that people commonly use. Well, I shouldn't say commonly, but they do use occasionally for tuning peg holes as well. And then the cavities, of course, you just tape from the inside. Now, this isn't strictly necessary. Not everyone does it. I generally do, but there are occasions when I don't think that I need to. It depends on the circumstances. My recommendation, though, is that you just go ahead and tape those off to be on the safe side. In case you want to put some copper tape in there after or something, it's going to make it a little easier for that stuff to stick. And taping it is generally easier than cleaning it off afterward. So that's what I'm doing in these circumstances. I'm taping all of that off, and then I'm going to run my tape over the fretboard. Now, as we get to that stage, I've got a video out already where I use this guitar kit as a demo, kind of doing a little time travel here, where I showed how to ease the lines on the side of the fretboard when you paint. So when you tape off your fretboard and you paint, you're going to end up with some ridges there where the paint has built up, where the tape isn't. And then when you take the tape off, you've got a ridge between that and the edge of the fretboard, and it's not super comfortable to play when you've got that in place. So you will want to be taking that off at some point. There is a video on that. Go ahead and check that out. I probably won't cover that in this series, but generally speaking, it's going to be a combination of sanding and scraping, or at least one of those. Now, for taping off the fretboard, just carefully line up the edge of your tape with the edge of your board, or the edge of your binding if you've got a guitar with a bound neck like this one. So that's what I'm doing here. I've got a piece of tape that's the entire length. I kind of start it lined up, and then I start at one end and make sure that it matches up perfectly. It's actually not that difficult to process. And then I fold that over. So using a wider piece of tape here is helpful because you don't need as much over the fretboard, over the middle of it. The wider piece of tape will cover half of the board pretty much, and then you can just do it once on each side and be done with it. Keep in mind that the general rule of thumb here is anything that you don't want paint on, you should be taping. So if you're concerned about your truss rod cavity, which I usually am, I roll up a piece of tape and put it in there. I don't want to jam up my tuning peg holes, so I do the same. I ball up a piece of tape and put it into those so that my tuning pegs will go through later without having me have to drill them out and possibly mess up my paint job. Pretty much everything. It's better to tape it now than to have to try and fix or clean it later. So I recommend that you think about what you want covered. Next up, we're going to move right along to the painting here, and I'm using a minigun for this one. This is my 878 SHE from Warwick. I like this guy. I like this gun. I can't afford a sated jet or anything like that, but a minigun is very helpful for guitars, so this is the one that I prefer. And I'm using an automotive acrylic from it, or through it rather. So that's, a decent quality paint that goes on very light. You'll see me spray it very lightly for the most part. Kind of like I would spray a nitrocellulose lacquer, maybe even a little lighter, and it dries extremely fast if you do it that way, and if you have some airflow, which I do because I'm in front of a booth, but I can also use the gun to create extra airflow. I've got this nozzle adjusted very low, basically to a perfectly round kind of spray can-like pattern. And usually you wouldn't use that for coating a guitar for front or back. But in this case, I'm going to be doing a very thin burst around it to kind of just make sure that that edge between the flamed maple and the mahogany is disguised. And I'm doing a fade, so you will have seen me do right at the beginning here a little bit of a fade from the horns upward in this case, but normally what we would call downward, where the black paint is going to be opaque at the top there, and then it's going to fade into that dye job that I have. So having this gun adjusted downward is helpful for all of that. You could definitely do the fade in the sides and the back with some form of fan pattern. That wouldn't be a problem, but particularly because I'm going in and doing that burst, I want to use this round pattern, which isn't an issue. It's the same rules. You overlap 50% when you're doing your overlapping portion for the coating. You just want to make sure that you're taking into account the fact that it's a round pattern, so you can't go as heavy basically. Again, this paint generally goes on pretty light and dries pretty quickly, so that's not really an issue either. Now, I haven't sealed this guitar. I'm moving straight to the paint on this one because I want a little bit of that grain showing through, but I will be sealing it and evening it all out. I'm just going to do all of that at the clear coat stage. So when I put my clear coat on, I will wait a day, sand it smooth, and then go ahead and clear coat again. So that's a deliberate choice on this one for the effect that I want, but usually you would do your sealing work before you move on to your paint. This is only in select circumstances that you go ahead and throw your paint on there before sealing. So here I am kind of just doing a last inspection, making sure I've got everything that I want painted before I paint the last of the neck, because then it makes it harder for me to grab it and move it around. Everything looked good, so I went ahead with it. We're going to come in once more and kind of do this again, touch it up, and make sure that our opaque black is as opaque as we need it. So again, I'm starting with that fade. Terrible framing here. Like, I don't know what I was thinking with the camera. It does get slightly better, I suppose, but I didn't do a great job of framing the last shot either. I was off camera basically for the headstock and the top. So sorry about that. I will get the hang of this filming thing one day. Anyway, I do the fade first on this one. It's a little unusual for me. Usually I do the sides first, but because I'm doing that fade pattern on the top and it's all in the same color, it just made sense for me to go ahead and do that first and then spray the edges at an angle so I don't have to worry about getting any on the front, which is aided by the fact that I have this pull spray booth in front of me, so no issues there. And then I kind of inspect it again, make sure all is as it should be, and finish off with my light burst. The burst is, again, just to kind of make sure that those edges are blended properly, but it also looks good. It's fairly subtle in the finished product. It's just a very thin one around the edges, as you can see here. And then I go ahead and finish off my headstock and neck, which I suppose are pretty much off camera once again here, because I'm foolish about my filming. We'll move on to the headstock next. We've got a request for a little custom logo that the customer designed, which is actually pretty nice. He did a good job. I was going to try and put something together for him, but I think he's probably better at it than I am. So I get this positioned. It's a laser cut piece of vinyl. I get it positioned and initially to make sure it's where it should be and looks good. And then I go ahead and put it down with some tape here to keep it in place. Then I've got to peel the backing off of my vinyl, which is a pretty straightforward process. Sometimes a little bit of it gets stuck, but that's fine. We can fix that. So you'll see after I peel this off, I've got a couple pieces there, or just I guess the one that needs to come off. So I pick that out, and then I press my vinyl down carefully, make sure that everything is in place. And that's it. Pull the tape off the front so I can spray through it, and then I'm just going to mask around it so that I don't get the paint that I'm spraying the logo in all over the place. Now I'm doing the logo with an airbrush, so I don't have to mask too far around it. I'm just going to basically put one line of tape around it. If I were using like a spray can or a spray gun to do this, I would have to mask up a much more significant area for the same reasons we talked about before. Paint goes everywhere, right? So you don't want to get it on something where you, don't want to get it. But with the airbrush, you don't have to worry so much. It's pretty easy to control. What I'm using here is just Apache Talon. This one actually comes with 3 caps and a fan cap as a 4th. So for coating something like this, the fan cap's actually really nice. It's kind of an unusual choice, but if you're interested in one of those, of course, the Amazon link in the description should have them under painting equipment. It'll also have one of these guns. This is the Warwick FLG 400. This is what I use for my clear coating, which is what we're doing next. I guess I forgot to mention this, but you probably already know, if you do want one of those guitar kits or any of the upgrade parts that I'm going to be putting into it, check out the Solo Music Gear link in the description. That and the Amazon links are affiliate links, so they help me out if you get anything from them. This is a catalyzed polyurethane, so if you're going to be using something like this, make sure you protect yourself. You see me wearing a glove on the hand that's not going to be holding the gun. You've just seen me with a full face respirator, so that's what I'm wearing here. Also available in the Amazon link if you want one. You need something good like that to protect yourself from this stuff. A half mask is certainly better than nothing, and I used one for a while, but this stuff is high in isocyanate. It dries quickly and hard, and it's just really, really bad for you. So the more protection you can get, the better off you will be. Now this particular one is mixed in a 4-to-1 ratio, so I use obviously a paint mixing cup, and I make sure I pick the right one first. Some people will actually tape on either side of it so that they make sure that they're using the correct lines. That's certainly something that you can do, but you don't need to as long as you're careful. And then I give this a good stir. You don't want to introduce bubbles, so no shaking, 007. You just stir this stuff and then carefully pour it into your gun. Again, you don't want to introduce a bunch of air into this if you can avoid it, because that can show up as bubbles and whatnot. It shouldn't, it should atomize coming out of the gun, but why risk it? Just give it a careful but good stir and then pour it in gently. You can also use some urethane reducer if you feel that it's necessary for yours. It can be helpful. And in terms of nozzle sizes, I like to use the 1.5 for this one, but anywhere from a 1.3 to a 1.5 is generally good. Now, this time I am using a fan pattern, of course, for Clearcoat, and I am starting with the sides like I normally would. This is a little tougher because this stuff, it doesn't dry to the touch in a matter of seconds like my acrylic automotive paint did. So once I spray something, it's going to get real sticky, and I'm not going to be able to touch it at all for a little while. So that does add some complexity to this spraying setup. What I've got for a spraying setup here is I've just hung this guitar from the top of the booth using a hook that's screwed right into the strap button hole at the bottom of the guitar. So, nothing fancy. It would be nice to have this a little further from the booth itself. In these circumstances, it kind of swings down and contacts the bottom there, so that's not ideal. That's why I have something sitting there so that I make sure that I can rest it against there on the taped up fretboard rather than on the headstock, which is going to be painted. So I clear coat the headstock and then I flip it around and sit it on there so that I don't have to worry so much about that. It's still a bit of a difficult setup to manage though. It's not ideal in terms of leaning it on there. It's not very stable. It doesn't turn out to be a problem. I'm careful about it and everything goes as it should, but it does make things more challenging. So ideally, if you're spraying a set neck guitar, you got a better place to hang it than this. I now do have a slightly better setup going, which I used for my second round of clear coat on this guy. After I let it sit and I sanded it, I hung it on something further away. So figured out a setup after playing this game. Again with the framing, now I'm just blocking the camera like a fool. But basically the only place that I can grab on this guitar if I need to right now is the pickup cavities, which is okay. I make that work. But yeah, it could be easier. So this is going to be it for this video. I'm going to finish this batch of Clearcoat. And then we'll let this dry and come back and move on to the next step. I don't know if I'm going to show the sand and paint again, aka I can't remember if I actually filmed that, or if we're going to move right into the polishing process on this one. But yeah, it's it's almost done. The finishing work is coming up on completion, and then we'll be able to move on to installation of hardware. We haven't done the frets yet, so we'll have to sort all of that out and make sure that everything looks good. This kit does look pretty damn good, and the frets all look good, but we'll probably do a little bit of leveling work on them. I have to go through with my fret rocker and make sure. So, as always, guys, thanks for watching. I hope you enjoyed the video. If you did, please feel free to give it a thumbs up. I would appreciate it. And remember to subscribe so you can see how this turns out. I'll see you next time.